My son and daughter found out that my brother had left me $5 million in his will and put me in a mental institution. All the inheritance went to them. But when they received a notice about Uncle's debts amounting to $10 million, the smiles instantly disappeared from their faces, and the next day there was a knock at their door. The psychiatric clinic, Silent Pines, became my prison at 62. White walls, the smell of disinfectants, and pills that cloud the mind. All this was given to me by my own children. Michael and Jennifer, the very ones I carried under my heart, raised and loved all my life. When I unexpectedly received an inheritance of $5 million, my children decided that their elderly mother could not manage such an enormous sum rationally. They acted quickly and ruthlessly. A bribed psychiatrist, false testimonies about my increasing forgetfulness, a staged knife attack in my own kitchen, and soon I was officially declared incompetent, while my children became the managers of my estate. Days here blend into each other. Wake up at 6 a.m, pills, a meager breakfast, group therapy where I stay silent, because any disagreement with the diagnosis is seen as aggravation of delusional ideas. Lunch, more pills, an hour in the garden under the watchful eyes of orderlies, dinner, evening pills, lights out at 9. And so it goes, day after day, week after week, month after month. The nurses look at me with fake pity. Poor woman, she thinks her children locked her up here for money. The doctors record every word I say about betrayal as proof of the paranoid component of dementia. And Michael and Jennifer visit me once a week with perfect smiles and bouquets of flowers I am not allowed to keep in my room. For safety reasons. A month within these walls has felt like eternity. But how did I get to this point? How did I go from being a respected librarian, a widow with an impeccable reputation, to a mad old woman locked in a clinic by her own children? To understand this, we must go back to the beginning, to a cold October evening in 1973, when a policeman knocked on our door with news that changed my life forever. Long ago, my mother told me, "Karen, family is the most precious thing we have." It took me 62 years and countless losses to truly understand the depth of those words. My name is Karen Miller, and my childhood memories are like an old film reel, faded in places, but with vivid frames that time could not erase. The brightest of them are connected to my older brother Robert, tall, with a thick head of dark hair and eyes that always betrayed his thoughts. He was my hero long before he was forced to become one. Robert was 8 years older than me. As children, that gap seemed enormous. He was already reading serious books when I was just learning letters. He was in high school when I still played with dolls. But that difference made our bond special. Robert didn't just tolerate his little sister. He was my protector, teacher, and best friend. "Carrie, look." That's what he called me, though our parents insisted on my full name. If you connect these stars, you'll see the Big Dipper. We lay in the backyard of our suburban Boston home, staring at the summer sky. I was 8. He was 16. He had just gotten his driver's license and proudly drove me to school in Dad's old Chevrolet. "I don't see any bear," I stubbornly replied, squinting into the darkness. "That's because you're looking with your eyes." Robert tapped my forehead lightly. "You have to look with your imagination. Try it." I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, I really did see the bear. That was one of many times Robert taught me to see the world differently, deeper, brighter, with greater possibilities. Our parents, John and Mary Foster, were good people. Father worked as an engineer for a construction company. Mother taught elementary school. They loved us, but were of that generation that didn't openly show affection. All the tenderness in our family came from Robert. He never hesitated to hug me when I was sad or say he was proud when I did well in school. Perhaps as the eldest child, he felt responsible for filling what our parents, in their reserved way, sometimes lacked. Everything changed on a cold October evening in 1973. I was 10, Robert 18. He had just enrolled at MIT to study engineering, and our parents couldn't stop praising him. That evening, they went out to dinner to celebrate Father's promotion. The doorbell rang around 11. Robert and I were watching a late movie, a Friday privilege. He went to answer, and I, wrapped in a blanket, stayed focused on the screen, unaware that my world was about to shatter. I remember the police hats, the hushed voices in the hallway, and the sudden silence when Robert returned. His face was chalk white, his eyes empty. "Carrie," he said in a voice I barely recognized, "there's been an accident." "Mom and Dad." He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. I understood from his face, from the heavy sigh of the policeman behind him, from the hollow emptiness that opened inside me and never left in the years to come. A drunk driver lost control on a rain-slick road, head-on collision, instant death, words that meant nothing to a 10-year-old girl who had just lost both parents at once. That night, Robert and I didn't sleep. We sat in the kitchen drinking the hot chocolate he made and stayed silent. What could be said? No words could fix it. But at some point, Robert took my hand and said the words that defined the rest of our lives. "I'll take care of you, Carrie. I promise. We'll get through this." He was only 18, but that night he became an adult, and he kept his promise, though the price was unbearably high. After the funeral came weeks of bureaucratic chaos. Social workers, lawyers, distant relatives we hardly knew, all deciding our fate. Aunt Martha, Mother's sister, offered to take me to Ohio, but that would have meant separation from Robert. "No," he said firmly at the meeting with the social worker. "Karen will stay with me. I am her only real family. Young man, you've barely reached adulthood. You have your studies, your whole life ahead of you, raising a child." "I'll manage," Robert interrupted. There was such conviction in his voice that even I believed him. After long arguments and thanks to our parents' insurance policy, which allowed us to keep the house, Robert managed to gain custody of me. But the price was steep. He had to take an academic leave from the institute. Temporary, as he said. But even at 10 years old, I knew that Robert's dreams of becoming an engineer were being postponed indefinitely. The hard days began. Robert got a job at an auto repair shop. He had always been good with mechanics. In the evenings, he worked at a supermarket, and on weekends, he did deliveries. 3 jobs just to support the house and take care of his little sister. I tried to help however I could, cooking simple meals, cleaning the house, studying hard so as not to cause extra trouble. But I was only 10, then 11, 12. I couldn't take on financial burdens. "Robert, maybe we should sell the house," I asked once, noticing him counting bills at the kitchen table, frowning deeper and deeper. "We could rent a smaller apartment." He looked up and a smile appeared on his tired face. "And deprive you of your pink room? No way, little one." But it wasn't about the pink room. It was about memory. This house was the last thing tying us to our parents. Selling it would mean admitting once and for all that they were never coming back. The years passed. Robert worked himself to exhaustion, often coming home after midnight, collapsing into bed, only to leave again in the morning. But every Sunday, no matter how tired he was, he made it our special day. We went to the park, the movies, or just cooked something tasty together. In those moments, he became the Robert I had known before the accident. Cheerful, full of energy, with a sparkle in his eyes. "You know, Carrie," he told me once when I was 15 and he was 23, "I want you to go to college." A good college. We were sitting on the porch, eating ice cream, watching the neighbor kids ride their bikes. "What about the money?" I asked cautiously. By then, I already understood our financial situation. "Don't worry about that," he ruffled my hair, the way he used to when I was little. "I have a plan." Robert's plan meant even more work, saving on everything, including his own health, and the small education fund our parents had managed to start before their deaths. By the time I graduated high school, we had enough to cover my first year at a decent university. I enrolled at Boston University, majoring in English literature. I dreamed of becoming a writer. Robert was so proud at the admission ceremony. Tall, handsome, in his only suit reserved for special occasions, clapping louder than anyone when my name was called. By the end of my freshman year, I met James Miller, a tall, serious economics student 2 years ahead of me. He came from a middle-class family but had big ambitions. Smart, determined, with a sense of humor that only surfaced once you knew him well. I brought him home to meet Robert. I remember how nervous I was. My brother's opinion meant everything to me. "He's a good guy," Robert said later after James had left. "But don't rush, Carrie. You've got your whole life ahead of you." I didn't listen. A year later, James and I were engaged, and another year after that, right after I graduated, we were married. Robert paid for our modest wedding, yet another financial burden he took on for the sake of my happiness. At the wedding, Robert gave a toast that made even the toughest guests cry. "My little Carrie has grown up," he began, holding a glass of champagne. "When our parents died, I promised I would take care of you. But the truth is, you often took care of me. You were my anchor, my reason to get up every morning and keep going. James," he turned to my new husband, "you're not just getting a wife, you're getting the strongest, kindest, and most amazing person I know. Treasure her." James and I rented a small apartment near his new job at a financial company. Robert stayed alone in the family house. I invited him for dinner every week, called him every day, but I felt something was changing. He became quieter, more thoughtful, sometimes distant. "Is everything all right?" I asked. "Of course, little one," he replied with a smile that never reached his eyes. "I'm just tired from work." I believed him, though my intuition told me he was hiding something. But Robert had always been the protector. He never wanted to burden me with his problems. When I turned 19, I told Robert I was pregnant. It wasn't planned. James and I had wanted to wait until his career was more stable. But life decided otherwise. "I'm going to be an uncle?" Robert's eyes lit up with the same brightness they had when he showed me the stars as a child. "Carrie, that's wonderful." He hugged me, spun me around the room like when I was little, and for that moment, everything felt perfect. I didn't know it would be the last time I ever saw him. A week later, Robert disappeared. He simply didn't show up for our traditional Sunday meeting. He didn't answer calls. When I went to the house, the door was locked, the mailbox overflowing. I went to the police, filed a missing person report, called every hospital, morgue, jail, anywhere my brother might have ended up. Nothing, no trace. Neighbors said they had seen Robert leaving in his car early one morning, carrying a small bag. He looked calm, even waved to Mrs. Jenkins, who was walking her dog, not at all like a man in trouble. "Maybe he just left," James suggested cautiously after several weeks of searching. "Karen, he had to give up everything for you. Maybe now, with me here and a baby on the way, he decided it was time to finally live for himself?" I refused to believe it. Robert would never have left without saying goodbye. He wouldn't have left me wondering what had happened. That wasn't his way. But as the weeks turned into months, even I began to doubt. Maybe James was right. Maybe taking care of me had become too heavy a burden, and once James appeared to share that burden, Robert simply let go? The thought was painful, but gradually I began to accept it. Life went on. Michael was born, named after James's father, and 2 years later came Jennifer, named after my mother. James's career advanced. We bought a house in the suburbs, and when the children grew older, I took a job at the local library. But not a day went by that I didn't think about Robert. Where was he? Was he happy? Did he ever think of me? It wasn't until 41 years later that I finally got the answers. By then, however, my life had changed completely again. James, my husband, died of a heart attack at just 58. It was an ordinary Tuesday, an ordinary workday. He simply never came back from lunch. The call from the hospital reached me at the library where I had been working for nearly 20 years. Mrs. Miller? The voice on the line was professionally restrained. Your husband has been admitted to Memorial Hospital with acute myocardial infarction. I didn't listen to the end. I dropped the phone and ran to the car, but it was too late. By the time I reached the hospital, James was gone. 30 years of marriage ended in an instant, without the chance to say goodbye. Michael was 28 then. He had finished business school and launched his first startup, something in tech. Jennifer, 26, had just returned from Europe, where she had been finding herself with the money James and I had saved for her education. They both flew in for the funeral, stood beside me at the graveside, held my hands, said all the right words. But I felt the distance. These beautiful, self-assured young people were my children, flesh of my flesh, yet sometimes they felt like strangers. "Mom, you need some rest," Jennifer said that evening, after the house had finally emptied of grieving relatives and friends. "Mike and I will stay with you for a few days." "Yes," Michael nodded, eyes still on his phone. I postponed a couple of meetings. Nothing urgent. I was grateful, though I knew that for both of them it was more a duty than genuine desire. Michael and Jennifer had grown up in comfort and security, not in luxury, but never knowing real hardship. Michael had a head for business but lacked the patience and persistence to see things through. Jennifer was beautiful, talented but scattered and inconsistent, changing hobbies and paths every season. James had spoiled them, perhaps too much. I had tried to instill in them the values Robert had taught me: hard work, responsibility, caring for family. But my children admired James's stories of successful deals and career victories more than my quiet tales of family and support. After the funeral, they stayed with me for a week, then returned to their lives. Michael to San Francisco, to his failing startup, Jennifer to New York, to yet another boyfriend, and yet another set of classes she would most likely quit in a month. I was left alone in a house full of memories and silence. James had left us enough money for me to live comfortably for the rest of my days. I kept working at the library, not so much for the paycheck, but for the company and the daily rhythm. Months passed. I grew used to solitude. I called my children every Sunday, listened to their hurried updates, invited them to visit, received polite refusals and promises of, "Soon, Mom, I promise." And then, nearly 3 years after James's death, a letter arrived. A plain white envelope addressed to me with no return address. Inside, a short note and a bank statement. "Dear Mrs. Miller, in connection with the death of Mr. William Stone, you have been named as beneficiary of his estate. The attached statement reflects the sum transferred to your account. Sincerely, Jonathan Brown, attorney." The statement showed a transfer of $5 million from a man whose name I had never heard before. At first, I thought it was a mistake, or more likely, a scam. I took the letter to my bank, ready to be told that no such transfer existed. "Mrs. Miller," the bank manager said after checking the information, "the transfer did in fact arrive yesterday. The sum is substantial. I would recommend you consult a financial advisor and perhaps an attorney." I sat in his office, paralyzed with shock. Who was this William Stone? Why had he left me such a fortune? I tried to recall every William I had ever known, but none bore the surname Stone. Calling the number listed in the letter, I reached the voicemail of a law firm. I left a message asking for clarification. The reply came the next day, another letter, this time on official letterhead. "Dear Mrs. Miller, Mr. Stone was a very private man and insisted on anonymity. All I can say is that he knew you and wished to provide for your well-being. The transfer is entirely legal, taxes have been paid, and no further action is required on your part. I regret that I cannot provide more details. Sincerely, Jonathan Brown." That evening I called my children. breaking our Sunday ritual for the first time, I told them about the mysterious inheritance, shared my confusion and unease. "Mom, that's amazing!" Jennifer exclaimed. "You're richer than Croesus now." "We need to be careful," said practical Michael. "I'll fly in on Friday. We'll go through the documents together." On Friday, both Michael and Jennifer arrived. For the first time in years, the three of us gathered in the family home. I was so glad to see them that I almost didn't notice the glances they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. Michael studied all the documents and made a few phone calls. "Looks like it's real, Mom," he said at last. "This stone really did leave you $5 million. The question is, who is he? And why?" "Maybe a secret admirer?" Jennifer winked. "Mom, you never told us about your romances." "Jenny," I shook my head. "After your father, there was no one else." "And before him?" my daughter pressed. "In college, maybe?" I thought for a moment. In college, there had only been James. Before him, a couple of dates, nothing serious. Not a single William. "I think this must be some mistake," I said at last. "Maybe the man just picked a random name from the phone book." "Mom," Michael put his hand on my shoulder. "No one gives away $5 million to random people." He knew you, and very well. The children stayed for the weekend. We looked through old photo albums, and I told stories from the past, trying to recall someone who could have been this mysterious benefactor. I mentioned Robert, too. Of course, the children knew about him, but only as the uncle who had disappeared before they were born. "Maybe it was him," Michael suggested over dinner. "Your brother. Changed his name, got rich, and now, before dying, decided to leave it all to you?" I nearly choked. "Robert? No, that's impossible." "Why not?" asked Jennifer. "People change their names, especially if they want a fresh start." "Robert wouldn't have vanished for 40 years without a word," I said firmly. "He wouldn't have left me guessing what happened to him. That's not who he was." "Mom," Michael spoke carefully, "people change. Especially when a lot of money is at stake." I didn't argue, but deep inside I knew. Robert hadn't abandoned me. Something must have happened, something serious that forced him to disappear without a trace. On Sunday, as the children were leaving, I noticed them whispering in the hallway while I was taking cups back to the kitchen. Moving closer, I caught fragments of their conversation. "Too old to manage that kind of money. She'll just give it away left and right. A couple of good doctors will confirm early stages. Forgetting things." I froze, unable to believe my ears. My own children were discussing how to declare me incompetent and take control of my sudden fortune. Something broke inside me at that moment. For 41 years, I had carried the pain of Robert's disappearance, the man who had sacrificed everything for me. And now my own children, the ones I had given all my love to, were planning to betray me for money. I quietly returned to the living room and pretended I hadn't heard anything. I said goodbye warmly, hugged them, promised to call, but inside me, a cold determination was growing. I would not let them take control of my life. I had to act quickly. The next day, I went to see my lawyer, elderly Harvey Goldman, who had helped James and me with our wills and other legal matters. "Mr. Goldman," I said, sitting in his office, "I want to change my will." "Of course, Mrs. Miller." He put on his glasses. "What exactly would you like to change?" "I want to disinherit my children." "Completely." Harvey took off his glasses and looked at me carefully. "Karen, that's a serious decision. Has something happened?" I told him about the overheard conversation, about my fears. Harvey listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting down notes. "I understand your feelings," he said when I finished. "But let's not rush." "Perhaps you misunderstood." "I understood perfectly well, Harvey. And I want to protect myself before it's too late." We drafted a new will, leaving the bulk of the estate to a charitable foundation supporting orphans, in memory of Robert and everything he had done for me. The children were left only symbolic amounts, just enough so they couldn't contest the will on grounds of unreasonable disinheritance. In addition, I withdrew a substantial sum in cash and hid it in the house, just in case. I also had my health checked by 3 different doctors, obtaining written statements of my full mental competence. 2 months later, my fears were confirmed. Michael and Jennifer came to visit Mom accompanied by a doctor, an elegant man with an expensive briefcase and a cold look. "Mom, this is Dr. Silverman," Michael introduced him. "He's a renowned specialist in gerontology. Jenny and I are worried about your health and asked him to consult." "Really?" I feigned surprise. "I didn't know you worried so much." "I feel perfectly fine." "Mrs. Miller," the doctor began, "at your age, the early stages of dementia can appear very subtly. Your children have noticed some troubling signs." "Such as?" I asked, keeping calm. "You forget things, Mom," Jennifer chimed in. "Remember last time you couldn't find your glasses?" "They were on my head, dear." "That happens to people of any age." "And you mix up dates," Michael added. "You said Dad died 4 years ago when it's only been 3. "You weren't here for 3 years," I answered quietly. "To me, it feels like 4. The conversation went on in the same vein. Every example of my supposed forgetfulness or odd behavior had a simple explanation, but I could see they had already made up their minds. Dr. Silverman suggested I undergo some simple tests at his clinic, just for prevention. I agreed, knowing I would pass any cognitive assessment with flying colors. But what happened next, I could not have foreseen. The night before the scheduled visit, I woke to noises in the kitchen. When I went downstairs, I found Jennifer rifling through the drawers. "What are you doing, dear?" I asked. She startled and turned around. In her hand was the carving knife, large, with a wooden handle. "Mom!" "You scared me. I was just looking for some sleeping pills. I can't fall asleep." "In the kitchen cabinets?" "The medicine is in the bathroom. You know that." She nodded but didn't put the knife down. And a second later, Michael entered the kitchen, dressed, with a bag in his hand. "What's going on?" I asked, feeling my heart race wildly. "Mom, you need to go back to bed," Michael said in the tone people use with stubborn children. "You're not yourself." "I am perfectly myself," I answered, "and I want to know what you're doing in my house in the middle of the night." "See?" Jennifer turned to her brother. "She's becoming paranoid." Dr. Silverman warned us this would happen. Then I understood. They wanted to stage an attack, maybe even self-harm, to get grounds for forced hospitalization. "You want to declare me insane because of money," I said bluntly, "but it won't work. I have statements from 3 independent doctors confirming my sanity, and a new will in which you get nothing." Their faces changed. The masks of care fell away, revealing malice and greed. "You didn't do that," Michael hissed. "You couldn't have." "I did, and all the documents are already with my lawyer." "You stupid old woman," Jennifer shouted, gripping the knife. "That money should have been ours." "Money you didn't earn?" I shook my head. "An inheritance from a man you never even knew?" "We're your children," Michael slammed his fist on the table. "Who else should get the money?" "People who it will truly help," I replied. "Not you two, so you can keep wasting your lives without purpose or meaning." What happened next, I remember as if in a fog. Jennifer lunged at me with the knife. Michael tried to stop her, not to protect me, but to avoid murder. In the struggle, the knife cut Jennifer's hand and she screamed. Michael shoved me. I fell, striking my head on the edge of the table. Neighbors came running at the noise. Someone called the police and an ambulance. When the medics arrived, Michael and Jennifer were crying, telling them how their poor mother with dementia had attacked them with a knife and then tried to harm herself. My version sounded unconvincing, an elderly woman accusing her caring children of a conspiracy to seize her fortune. Classic paranoid delusion, the doctors said. I ended up in a psychiatric clinic, the very one Dr. Silverman recommended. Diagnosis, dementia with paranoid component and hallucinations. No one wanted to hear my explanations. The nurses nodded with pity. The doctors scribbled in their notebooks. Meanwhile, Michael and Jennifer petitioned the court to have me declared legally incompetent and themselves appointed as my guardians. My lawyer, Harvey Goldman, fought back, submitting the medical reports confirming my competence, but they were dismissed as issued before the worsening of the condition. 2 weeks later, the court ruled in favor of my children. I was officially declared incapacitated. Control over all my assets and decisions, including medical, passed to Michael and Jennifer. All I could do was watch my life collapse through the barred window of the ward that had become my prison. The days in the psychiatric clinic blurred into one endless gray stripe. Morning rounds, pills, group therapy, lunch, more pills, free time I spent staring out the window, dinner, evening pills, sleep, and then the same all over again. I refused to take the medication, but the nurses were insistent. Mrs. Miller, it's for your own good. Eventually, I learned to hide the pills under my tongue and flush them later. I needed a clear head. In the first weeks, I tried to reach the staff, explained my situation, begged them to contact my lawyer, demanded an independent medical evaluation. But in the nurses' eyes, I saw only pity. In the doctors, professional indifference. To them, I was just another old woman with dementia and persecution mania. Michael and Jennifer came once a week, impeccably dressed, with fake smiles, always bringing flowers or boxes of chocolates I couldn't eat because of diabetes. They knew that. "How are you, Mommy?" Jennifer would ask, sitting on the edge of my bed in the ward that cost them $5,000 a month. From my money, of course. "Wonderful," I replied with irony they preferred to ignore, especially for someone locked up in a psychiatric clinic by her own children. "You're here for your own safety," Michael sighed, glancing at his watch. "The doctors say you're getting better. Maybe in a couple of months we can take you home." Home. I wondered what he meant by that word. My home, where I had lived 40 years with James, or some assisted living facility with medical care, where they planned to dump me. I didn't ask. I just looked at them, trying to see in these strangers the children I once carried in my arms, read bedtime stories to, kissed scraped knees for, and wiped away tears. Maybe it really was my fault. Maybe I failed to pass on the values Robert instilled in me. Where did I go wrong? 1 month in the clinic turned into 2. I began to adapt to the routine, to find small joys, a book from the library, a rare ray of sunlight breaking through the clouds, a tasty dessert in the cafeteria. I befriended a few other patients whose stories were no less tragic than mine. There was Eleanor, a former ballerina with bipolar disorder. On good days, she could talk for hours about her performances on the world's great stages. On bad days, she wouldn't get out of bed. There was Richard, a university professor with obsessive-compulsive disorder who could discuss Kant's philosophy with the clarity of a genius, but scrubbed his hands raw every time. And there was George, a quiet elderly man diagnosed with depression, who spent hours in the common room staring out the window. He rarely spoke, hardly joined in group activities. The staff said he had lost his wife a year ago and had barely spoken since. One day, I sat down beside him, for no reason, not expecting conversation. We sat in silence, watching the clouds. Then I noticed the book on his lap. "To the Lighthouse" by Virginia Woolf, I said. One of my favorite books. He turned and looked at me. For the first time, really saw me, not through me. "You've read it?" "Many times," I smiled. I worked in a library for almost 20 years. His gaze changed. Interest sparked in his eyes. What other books do you love? That was how our first conversation began. About literature, about the books that had shaped our lives, about words that can heal. That day, George, for the first time in ages, had dinner in the dining hall instead of his room. Gradually, we began spending more time together. I learned that his full name was George William Stone, though he always preferred his first name. He was a widower, as I had heard, but his story was more complicated than it seemed. My Elizabeth died slowly, he told me once, as we sat in the clinic's garden. Pancreatic cancer. 3 years of pain, chemotherapy, hope, and despair. I was with her every day, every minute. And when she was gone, something broke inside me. I understand, I said softly. When James died, I felt like half of me died with him. George nodded. You told me about your brother, he said after a long pause, how he took care of you after your parents died. Yes, Robert. I felt the familiar ache in my chest at the mention of his name. He sacrificed everything for me and then just disappeared. I was 19. I never found out what happened to him. You loved him. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. More than anyone in the world. He was my hero. I hesitated. You know what's strange? Sometimes I look at you, and something in your eyes reminds me of him, a kind of light. George looked away, and for a moment I thought I had said something wrong. But then he asked, What happened to your children? Why are they keeping you here? And I told him everything. About the mysterious inheritance, about Michael and Jennifer's conspiracy, about the knife in the kitchen, about the trial. George listened without interrupting, only sometimes clenching his fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Do you believe me? I asked when I finished. Everyone else thinks I've gone mad. I believe every word you say, Karen, he said firmly, and I'll help you get out of here. At that moment, something changed between us. We stopped being just two lonely patients in a psychiatric clinic. We became allies, friends, and maybe something more. In the following weeks, we spent almost all our time together. We walked in the garden, played chess, discussed books and films. George turned out to be incredibly well educated, with a subtle sense of humor and a kind soul. Gradually, his depression began to recede. At least that's what the doctors said during their weekly rounds. My dementia, of course, remained on record, despite the fact that I easily beat the staff at chess and could recite whole pages from books by heart. One day, when we were sitting on a bench in a far corner of the garden, George took my hand. I've wanted to ask you for a long time, he began hesitantly. Have you ever thought about what really happened to Robert? Do you have any theories? What do you think happened to him? Do you have theories? That question caught me off guard, as it always did whenever I asked it of myself. Thousands, I sighed. At first, I thought something terrible had happened, an accident, a crime. But the police found no trace. Later, my husband suggested Robert had simply decided to start a new life, free of the burden of taking care of me. Over time, I almost believed it. And sometimes I imagined he was secretly watching over me all these years, like a guardian angel. George squeezed my hand tighter. What if the last one is true? I smiled faintly. A pretty fantasy. But why would he disappear only to watch from afar? Robert would never have hurt me on purpose. Maybe he had no choice, George said softly. Maybe he protected you in the only way he could. There was something strange in his voice. I turned and looked at him closely. You know something about my brother? George was silent for a long time, staring at his hands. Then he lifted his head and his eyes met mine. Karen, I need to show you something, but not yet. Soon. Before I could insist on an explanation, a nurse appeared, announcing it was time for group therapy. That night, I couldn't sleep, turning over George's strange words in my mind. Did he actually know something about Robert? Or was it just sympathy, a way to comfort me? The next day, George joined me at breakfast as if nothing had happened. When I tried to return to our conversation, he gently shifted the subject. "Shall we read in the garden today?" I picked up Donna Tartt's new novel from the library. I agreed, deciding not to push. If George wanted to tell me something, he would do it when he was ready. A week passed in our usual routine. I had almost forgotten his mysterious promise when, on Saturday morning after breakfast, George quietly slipped me a folded piece of paper. "Read it when you're alone," he whispered. In my room, I unfolded the note. It was a newspaper clipping. Recent, judging by the date. The headline read, "Millionaire's heirs receive notice of $10 million debt." The article mentioned Michael and Jennifer Miller, who had inherited a vast fortune from their mother, but were now facing lawsuits from creditors for astronomical sums. I read the article 3 times, unable to believe my eyes. How was this possible? I wasn't dead, even if I had been declared legally incompetent, and I had no debts, certainly not that large. When I met George in the common room, he was calmly playing chess with another patient. After his opponent left, I sat across from him. "What does this mean?" I asked, nodding toward the pocket where the clipping lay. "Karma," George murmured with a slight smile. "You see, Karen, sometimes people get exactly what they deserve." "But I don't understand these debts." "Fiction," he shrugged. "At least for now. But your children don't know that. They believe they've inherited an estate weighed down with enormous liabilities." How did you do this?" George glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "I have connections and resources." "But why?" I was bewildered. "Why are you helping me?" "Who are you, George?" He was about to answer, but at that moment a nurse approached. "Mr. Stone, Dr. Mitchell is waiting for you." George rose, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "Soon, Carrie. Very soon." That night I couldn't sleep. Part of me felt a guilty satisfaction, imagining Michael and Jennifer's panic at receiving notice of debts. Another part still ached for them. Whatever else they were my children, flesh of my flesh. And there was one more thought I couldn't shake. George had called me Carrie. No one, except Robert, had ever used that nickname. 3 days later, just when I began to think George was avoiding me, something happened that changed everything. Michael and Jennifer stormed into the clinic like a hurricane, unannounced, outside visiting hours. I was told they were waiting for me in the visitor's room and that it was urgent. For the first time in months, they looked disheveled. Jennifer without her perfect makeup, Michael unshaven, with red-rimmed eyes. "Mom, you have to help us." Jennifer grabbed my hands as soon as I walked in. "This is some kind of mistake. You have to renounce the inheritance retroactively. Or re-sign everything so the debts won't pass on," Michael added, shaking a stack of documents. "We spoke with lawyers. There are a few loopholes." I stared at them silently. My children, who had kept me locked here for months, drugged and powerless, suddenly needed me. "What happened?" I asked calmly, though I already knew the answer. "Debts, Mom, enormous debts," Jennifer cried. "The very next day after we inherited, collectors came knocking on our door." $10 million, Michael groaned. "We don't have that kind of money." Jennifer paced the room. "All our accounts are frozen. The bank repossessed my car. My car, Mom. And my investors pulled out the moment they heard about the debts," Michael added. "My whole business is collapsing." "How did this happen?" I asked. "Where did the debts come from?" "We don't know," they shouted in unison. "You know," came a voice from the doorway, "it's funny to watch how quickly priorities change when money turns into debt." We all turned. George was standing in the doorway, but somehow different, straighter, more present. "This isn't your business, old man," Michael snapped. George slowly walked closer. Then he took off his glasses, pulled away the gray wig, peeled off the fake beard. The world stopped. In front of me stood a man older than in my memories of Robert, with wrinkles and gray at his temples, but with the same eyes, bright, alive, full of love and pain at once. "Robert." My voice was barely audible. "Hello, little one," said my brother, with the very same voice I remembered from childhood. "I'm sorry I made you wait 41 years. I don't remember how I ended up in his arms. I remember only the warmth of his embrace, the familiar scent that hadn't changed in all these years, and his whisper, "Everything's going to be all right, Carrie. Everything's going to be all right now." Michael and Jennifer stood there with their mouths open while Robert, still holding my hand, turned to them. "Allow me to introduce myself properly. Robert Foster, your mother's brother. Or, as you may know me, William Stone, the man who left your mother a $5 million inheritance." "That's impossible," Jennifer whispered. "Mom said you disappeared 40 years ago." "That's true," Robert nodded. "I had no choice." Michael and Jennifer gaped as Robert told them the truth. In 1982, I accidentally witnessed a murder committed by Vincent Carmine, head of a powerful crime syndicate. They spotted me, identified me, and I had to run. The FBI offered me a deal, a new identity in exchange for testimony against Carmine. I agreed, but I made one condition: complete protection for Karen. The only way to guarantee her safety was to vanish from her life completely, without explanations or contact. My head was spinning at his words. All those years, all those decades of questions and pain had such a simple and terrible explanation. "Why didn't you come back later?" I asked softly. "When it was safe?" Robert squeezed my hand. "Carmine got life in prison, but he had a long reach and a long memory. I had to become someone else, Carrie. Completely. A new name, a new life, a new self in another state. But I never stopped watching over you." He turned to my children. "I anonymously paid for the repairs on your house when your mother didn't have the money. I slipped in winning lottery tickets when Jennifer needed college funds. I arranged your first job, Michael, through a shell company. I was always there, just from the shadows." "And you became rich?" Michael asked, clearly struggling to process it all. "I got lucky," Robert shrugged. "I always had a head for business. With my new identity and the FBI's starting capital, I invested in technology just as it was taking off. First personal computers, then the internet, then mobile tech. My company is worth just over $1 billion now." But why now?" Jennifer looked bewildered. "Why come back now?" For a moment, Robert's face turned sad. "Carmine died in prison 3 months ago. For the first time in 40 years, I felt free. I decided it was time to see Karen again, to tell her the truth. But there was something else." He took a deep breath and looked straight into my eyes. "The doctors diagnosed me with pancreatic cancer, late stage. They gave me 6 months, maybe a little more. And I decided I didn't want to leave this world without seeing you again. Dear viewers, if you enjoy this story, please support it with a like, comment, or subscription. Your support is very important to us. Thank you." My heart clenched. To find my brother again, only to lose him? "But I didn't know what I would find," Robert went on, his voice hardening. "At first, I only watched from afar. I saw how you struggled after your husband's death, how your children rarely visited you. So I decided to test them, to leave you a large inheritance and see how they would act. Would they care for you or—" His gaze turned to Michael and Jennifer, suddenly icy. "Or try to have you declared incompetent and steal your money. Well, they failed the test. We didn't mean," Michael began. "You did," Robert cut him off. "I know everything. I saw everything. I have recordings of your conversations with that so-called Dr. Silverman, who will lose his license once my lawyers are through with him. I have proof of how you plan to stage an attack by Karen on you." "But the debts," Jennifer stammered. "The 10 million... "Fiction," Robert smiled without humor. "A little trick to draw you out. There are no debts. Not yet." "What does that mean?" Michael straightened, trying to look confident. "It means you have a choice," Robert said coldly. "Option 1. I hand all the evidence to the police and the FBI. Fraud, unlawful confinement, conspiracy to commit financial crimes. That's 10 years minimum, even with a good lawyer. Option 2. You renounce any claims on Karen and her estate, return the $5 million you stole, and disappear from her life forever. Whether your mother chooses to see you again after that will be up to her." The room fell silent. I looked at my children, searching for even a trace of remorse, even a hint of love for me, but all I saw in their eyes was fear and calculation. We need to think," Michael finally said. "You have 1 hour," Robert replied, glancing at his watch. "My lawyers are waiting in the hall with documents for both options." Michael and Jennifer chose the second option. They signed the papers right there, in the visitor's room of the psychiatric clinic. They didn't apologize, didn't say goodbye. They just left without looking back. I should have felt the pain of that final betrayal, but strangely, all I felt was relief and gratitude that by my side stood the one person who had always truly loved me. "Let's go home, Carrie," Robert said once the formalities were over and my confinement was officially ended. Robert's, or Williams, as the world knew him, home turned out to be a modern villa in Palo Alto overlooking the bay. Spacious, full of light, but not ostentatiously luxurious. Exactly the kind of house I had imagined my brother would live in. "Do you live alone?" I asked as we drove through the gates. "Not exactly," he smiled. "You'll see." The moment we parked, the front door swung open and a group of people spilled out onto the porch. A young woman with a child in her arms, a middle-aged man, a teenager, and an older woman. "Meet them, Carrie," Robert said, helping me out of the car. "This is my family. My daughter Elizabeth, her husband David, their children, Sam and little Mary, and my wife Anna." "Your wife?" I looked at the elegant older woman smiling at me. "But you said you'd lost your wife." "I lied," Robert said simply. "Part of my cover story in the clinic. Anna knows everything and supported my plan." Anna came up to me and hugged me tightly. "At last," she said warmly. "Robert has told me so much about you. I feel like I've known you all my life." "I have a niece," I whispered, still unable to believe what was happening, "and grandnieces and nephews." "And another nephew," Robert added. "My son John is away on business in Europe right now, but he'll be back soon. He's eager to meet you." Elizabeth came forward with her little son in her arms. "Aunt Karen," she hugged me with her free arm, "every year Dad showed us photos of your family. He told us stories from your childhood. We grew up knowing you, even without meeting you in person." I don't know what to say." Tears streamed down my cheeks. "There's nothing you need to say." Robert put his arm around my shoulders. "Just be with us. We're your family." The following days were like a dream. I got to know my new family, listened to their stories, and shared mine. Robert told me everything I had missed over the years. How he met Anna in Seattle, where he started his business. How his children were born. How his company grew. Elizabeth was a mathematics professor at Stanford, her husband David a physician. Their son Sam, at 16, was already showing signs of genius in programming. Little Mary was a delightful whirlwind of 3-year-old energy. John, as I later learned, worked for a humanitarian organization focused on education in developing countries. "They all know the truth?" I asked Robert as we sat on the terrace, watching the sunset over the bay. Yes, he nodded. When they grew up, I told them everything. About our childhood, about your husband, your children, about why I disappeared. And they're not angry? That you hid it from them? At first, it was hard, Robert admitted, especially for Elizabeth. She's always been principled, but in time they understood, and they always considered you part of the family, even if unseen. I always imagined you might have children, I said quietly, but I never thought they would know about me. Robert took my hand. Carrie, I never stopped being your brother, even when I couldn't be there. I know. I squeezed his hand. Now I know. Days turned into weeks. I moved into the guest house on Robert's estate, small but cozy, with its own little garden and a view of the bay. Anna helped me settle in, becoming my first real friend in a long time. He never stopped thinking about you, she told me once as we drank tea in my new garden. Every year, on your birthday, he became so quiet, so pensive, and when your children were born, he followed every step of theirs. Through private investigators, of course. He hoped they would turn out to be worthy people. It's a pity they disappointed him, I sighed. He only cared about how they treated you, Anna said gently, not about what kind of people they became on their own. Robert often grew withdrawn, quiet. The illness was progressing, though he tried not to show how much he was suffering, but I saw it. In the careful way he moved in the morning, in the shadows under his eyes, in the number of pills he took every day. You need help, I told him one day when I found him hunched in pain in his study. The best doctors, experimental treatment. I've already tried, Carrie. He gave a weak smile. Everything there is. Some things just have to be accepted. I just found you. My voice trembled. I can't lose you again. Robert pulled me close. You'll never lose me. Even when I'm gone, I'll still be with you. In your memories, in my children's hearts, in the words we share before I leave. It's not fair, I whispered. We lost 40 years. But we have now. He kissed my forehead, just like he used to when we were children, and I'm grateful for every minute. I spent all the time I could with him. We recalled our childhood, made up for lost years, shared stories. He told me about his life in the witness protection program, about the constant fear that Carmine would find him, and even worse, reach me. Do you know what was the hardest? He said one night as we sat on the terrace, wrapped in blankets. Watching you suffer from afar and not being able to help. When James died, I wanted to come, hold you, be there. But Carmine was still alive, and his men still kept an eye on you, just in case, hoping I would show myself. You did help. I rested my head on his shoulder. Those random lottery wins, the anonymous gifts. I always felt that someone was looking after me. I just didn't know it was you. He smiled. Remember when your car broke down on the highway and a random mechanic stopped to help? That was my man. I was watching you that day. You were there? I lifted my head. In a car across the road. Wearing a wig and fake mustache, he chuckled. You walked 5 feet away from me on your way to the tow truck. I tried to imagine it. My brother sitting so close, forced to remain invisible. What strength of will that must have taken. If Carmine had found me, Robert continued, he would have used you to get to me. That's why I had to disappear completely. No trace, no thread that could lead from me back to you. I understand, I said softly. Now I do. 2 months after I moved into Robert's home, John arrived. His son, my nephew. Tall like his father, with the same piercing eyes but his mother's gentle smile. He hugged me as if he'd known me his whole life. Aunt Karen, he said, pulling back. At last. John turned out to be an extraordinary young man. intelligent, compassionate, with a deep sense of social justice that had led him to work in the nonprofit sector. Dad wanted me to go into business, he told me over dinner that first evening, but later he supported my choice to focus on educational programs. He said the most important thing is helping others, just like he once helped you. I looked at Robert, seated at the head of the table, surrounded by his family. Our family. He taught me everything that matters in life, I said. Courage, loyalty, love. Robert smiled, but I could see how hard it was for him. The illness was progressing faster than the doctors had expected. Instead of the promised 6 months, it was clear he had far less time left. In the final weeks, he slept often, waking only for short periods. We all took turns sitting with him. Me, Anna, the children, even the grandchildren. One day, when we were alone, he took my hand with a weak grip. "Carrie," his voice was barely audible. "Don't regret anything. I had a good life. I had love, family, success. And now I have you again." "I was always with you," I whispered, fighting back tears. "Even when I didn't know where you were." "I want you to promise me something." He squeezed my hand a little harder. "Promise me you'll live fully, that you'll find joy in every day, that you'll remain part of this family, our family." "I promise." I pressed his hand to my lips. "I promise, Robert." He died quietly in his sleep, surrounded by his loving family. We all cried, but our tears held not only the pain of loss, but gratitude for the time we'd been given together. The funeral gathered many people, colleagues, friends, business partners. To the world, he was William Stone, successful businessman, philanthropist, family man. But within our circle, we remembered Robert Foster, brother, father, husband, a man who lived 2 lives to protect the ones he loved. After Robert's death, I thought I would feel lost again, but instead, I discovered I was surrounded by love and care from his family, my new family. Elizabeth invited me to family dinners every Sunday. John took me to charity events for his foundation. Anna became my closest friend. We traveled together, went to concerts, shared memories of Robert. Little Mary grew especially attached to me. At 3.5, she was a curious, bright child, full of boundless energy. "Grandma Karen, tell me another story about Daddy Robert when he was little," she would ask, climbing onto my lap. And I would tell her about how Robert taught me to ride a bike, how he made dollhouses for me out of cardboard boxes, how he defended me from bullies at school. With each story, it felt as if he returned to us, even if just for a moment. One day, about a year after Robert's death, Anna and I were sorting through his personal belongings. In an old box, I found a photograph, faded and worn. It showed Robert and me, so young, standing together in our parents' backyard, arms around each other. I was about 15, he was 23. "He always carried this photo with him," Anna said quietly. "Even when he had to change his name, his appearance, his entire life. This picture was always with him. It reminded him who he really was and what he was living for." I pressed the photograph to my heart. "You know," I said, gazing out the window at the bay glowing in the rays of the setting sun, "long ago, Mom told me, 'Karen, family is the most precious thing we have.'" I didn't understand the depth of those words until I went through all of this. Loss, betrayal, reunion. But she was right. Family isn't just blood. It's love. Love that withstands the test of time and distance. Anna took my hand. "You were always his guiding star, Karen. Even when he couldn't be near, you gave him the strength to keep going. And now you're our guiding star, our connection to him." I smiled through my tears. My long life had held so much loss and pain, but also so much love. And love, I realized, never truly disappears. It changes shape, finds new paths, continues on in the next generations. 5 years had passed since I gained a new family and lost Robert. Life had taken on a new rhythm, new colors. At 67, I felt more alive than ever. I moved out of the guest house into the main home at Anna's insistence. "There's no sense in both of us living alone in different corners of the property," she said. And she was right. We had become not just relatives, but true friends. 2 widows bound by love for the same man. Elizabeth became the dean of Stanford's mathematics department. Sam was admitted to MIT, the very school Robert had been forced to give up because of me. The irony of fate. His grandson achieved the dream he himself had set aside. John expanded his educational program, receiving a major grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I often helped him with paperwork and event planning. My years in the library turned out to be surprisingly useful. Little Mary grew into a lively, bright 8-year-old with a talent for drawing and an insatiable curiosity. She still called me Grandma Karen and often spent the night with me when Elizabeth and David were away on work trips. I began writing memoirs. At first, just for the family, to preserve Robert's story and our childhood. But gradually, it grew into something more. John read a draft and insisted I try to publish it. "This story needs to be told, Aunt Karen," he urged. "It's about love, sacrifice, about how the Witness Protection Program tears families apart." It matters. I hesitated. Many details of Robert's story were still confidential, though Carmine had long since died. But John helped me connect with lawyers and former FBI agents to determine what could be shared publicly. While working on the book, I thought often of my children, of Michael and Jennifer, whom I hadn't seen since that day in the psychiatric clinic. My feelings toward them were complicated. The pain of betrayal mixed with the unquenchable maternal love and with worry about how their lives had unfolded. "Have you ever wanted to reach out to them?" Anna asked one day when I was at my computer revising a chapter about motherhood. "Sometimes," I admitted, but then I remember how they looked at me in that visitor's room, without a drop of remorse, only fear for their financial security, and I realized there's no point. They made their choice. My book, Disappearance and Return. The story of a divided family was published the following year and, to my surprise, became a bestseller. I was invited to interviews, literary festivals, universities. Robert's story touched many hearts, especially those affected by the Witness Protection Program and its unforeseen consequences for families. I knew Michael and Jennifer had probably heard of the book or even read it, but they never reached out, and I didn't seek them either. Some rifts cannot be healed, but one day, nearly 7 years after everything, I received a letter. No return address, sent to my publisher. Inside was a plain white sheet with just a few lines, written in Jennifer's hand. "Mom, I read your book. I'm not asking for forgiveness, nor do I expect it. I just want you to know I have a daughter. She's 2 years old. Her name is Karen. Jennifer." Enclosed was a photograph. A little girl with my eyes and Robert's smile. My granddaughter, named after me. I sat with that letter for a long time, unsure how to react. It wasn't an apology, nor an attempt at reconciliation, more a recognition of a bond that can never be broken, no matter how hard we try. I showed the letter to Anna. "What will you do?" she asked after a long silence. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Part of me wants to meet my granddaughter. Another part fears new pain and disappointment." "What would Robert do?" Anna asked softly. I thought about it. Robert, who had sacrificed everything for me, who had watched from afar but was always ready to help, who had never stopped loving even when he couldn't be there. He would have tried, I finally said, but on his own terms, with caution. In the end, I replied to Jennifer through the same publisher, a short note with my phone number and the words, "I would like to meet little Karen. Call me if you think it's possible." 2 months later, the phone rang. Jennifer's voice, uncertain and tense, asked if we could meet at a park near her new home in Portland. The meeting was awkward. Jennifer, older and stripped of her former polish, carried herself stiffly. Her husband, a quiet man named Paul, a schoolteacher, seemed kind, though a little bewildered, and little Karen was delightful. Lively, curious, with my eyes and the same unruly curls Robert had as a child. "Grandma?" She looked at me with curiosity when Jennifer introduced us. "Yes, sweetheart," I crouched down in front of her. "I'm your Grandma Karen." "We have the same name," she observed seriously, "and the same eyes." "That's right," I smiled. "You're very observant." While the child played on the playground under Paul's watch, Jennifer and I sat on a bench. A heavy silence hung between us. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she finally said, watching her daughter. "I know what I did." "Why did you write?" I asked directly. "After so many years." Jennifer was quiet for a long time, searching for words. "When I read your book about Uncle Robert, about what he did for you, I understood for the first time what true love means. I've never felt anything like it. Not from you, not from Dad. You gave us things, comfort, education, but not that unconditional love that makes you sacrifice everything." Her words pierced me. "We loved you and Michael," I protested, "with all our hearts." "Maybe," she shrugged, "but we didn't feel it. Or didn't understand it. When little Karen was born for the first time in my life, I felt that mad, all-consuming love, the willingness to die for someone. And then I began to realize what Michael and I did to you." She turned and looked me in the eyes. For the first time during our conversation. "You were ready to give us everything, and we wanted to take away your last possession, your mind, your dignity. That's unforgivable. And I'm not asking forgiveness. I just wanted my daughter to know her grandmother, to have more love in her life than I had in mine." I looked at this woman, my daughter, and saw not only the greed and selfishness that had led to our estrangement, but also a spark of awareness, a glimmer of remorse. "Where's Michael?" I asked. "In Europe, married a wealthy French woman, lives in Nice. We rarely speak. And you? How is your life?" "Modest," she gave a faint smile. "Paul's a school teacher. I work as a designer in a small firm. We only have enough money for the basics, but, for the first time in my life, I feel real. I'm not pretending to be someone else." I nodded. Perhaps that was both her punishment and her redemption. To live modestly, honestly, without facade or pretense. "I can't promise I'll ever fully forgive you, Jennifer," I said after a pause, "but I would like to know my granddaughter. And maybe, over time, we can not start over, but build something new." "That's more than I hoped for," she said quietly. From that day, we began slowly rebuilding a connection, not like before, but on new terms. Little Karen came to visit me regularly, sometimes with her parents, sometimes alone. She became close friends with Mary, technically her second cousin, but they quickly became inseparable. Anna and Robert's whole family surprised me with their understanding. Robert always said, "Forgiveness frees not only the one you forgive, but yourself as well." Anna told me when I worried about how they might feel about Jennifer and her family being part of our lives. I lift my eyes to the sky and find the Big Dipper, the first constellation Robert ever showed me. I feel a tear roll down my cheek, but it is not one of grief. It is one of gratitude. "Thank you, Robert," I whisper to the stars, "for everything, for every moment, for every bond, for every story, for family, the most precious thing we have." And it seems to me that the brightest star twinkles in reply.